There were two strangers standing on my dock at 6 in the evening, suitcases in hand, holding a printed confirmation email in a plastic sleeve. They told me they had paid $1,855 to stay in my house for 6 nights. My nephew was at the front door, pounding on it hard enough to rattle the frame. "Uncle Clay, open up. These people paid." I didn't open it. I was standing 12 feet from that door, in the dark, with my phone recording every second of it. Those two strangers had no idea they'd been scammed. My nephew knew exactly what he'd done. He had listed my house online as a rental, but it wasn't his house. It was the house I bought with my own money. And the reason my nephew was so sure I'd fold is that in 66 years, nobody in my family had ever heard me say no to anything. Not once. Not about anything. And that's the real story here. Everything else is just what happened after the first time in my life I said it. My name is Clay Broussard. I'm 66 years old and I live on a tidal creek outside East Point, Florida, about 9 miles from Apalachicola, in a 900-square-foot cypress fish camp up on pilings with a tin roof that sounds like applause when it rains. I spent 31 years as an air traffic controller, Jacksonville Center mostly, en route, high sectors. If you don't know the job, here's the whole of it in one sentence. My entire career was keeping things a safe distance from each other. That's it. That's the job. Separation. You have aircraft moving at 480 knots in 3 dimensions, and your one responsibility on this earth is that they never occupy the same space at the same time. 31 years of that. And then you retire, and you find out that's not a skill, that's a personality, and you can't put it down. My wife was Ruth Ann Broussard, née Dupree, out of Mariana. She was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at 58 years old. She died at 64. 7 years, and I kept her at home for 5.5 of them. I'm not going to walk you through that. Some of it I couldn't describe if I wanted to, and most of it I don't want to. I'll tell you one thing about it, and then we'll move on. There is a specific stretch in the middle of a disease like that, where the person is still there and knows exactly what's happening to them. And that stretch is about 14 months long. That's the part. Everything after is grief. That part is something else. I retired in the 3rd year of it. I did the nights and the mornings and the appointments and the paperwork and the whole thing, and my sister Loretta offered to come down from Tallahassee more times than I could count. And I said no. Every single time. Hold on to that. That's the hinge this entire thing swings on, and I didn't see it for 11 months. Ruth Ann died in March, 3.5 years ago, and about 2 years after that I bought the camp. $338,000. Cash, all of it. The whole of what 31 years of shift differential and holiday pay and never once taking a real vacation had turned into. Charmaine Bevel handled the closing in a little office on Avenue E in Apalachicola. I remember she had a box fan going because the window unit was out, and she slid the papers across and said, "Mr. Broussard, you picked yourself a spot." I drove out that afternoon and parked on the Shell Drive and cut the engine and just sat there for a while. 900 square feet. Up on pilings, because everything out there is on pilings. One main room with a stove and a table. A bedroom you could not swing a cat in. A screened porch across the whole back facing the creek. 3/4 of an acre of high ground and marsh, and a dock that needed about 4 boards. The oyster boats go out past the mouth of that creek at about 5:15 every morning. You hear them before you see anything. And there was a pelican on my end piling the first morning I woke up there. Brown pelican, adult. And something was wrong with his left wing. He carried it a little low and he didn't dive the way they do, that folded up dive straight down. He'd sort of drop onto things sideways. He was there the next morning too. And the one after. I never named him. I want to be clear about that, because I know how this sounds. I did not name a bird. But I looked for him. Every morning for about 5 weeks it was the same. Up at 5, coffee on the screen porch, oyster boats going out, that pelican on the piling doing badly the thing he was built to do and getting by anyway. And I have to tell you something, because I promised honesty. Those 5 weeks were the first time in 7.5 years that I woke up in a room where nobody was dying. I don't know how to explain to you what that is. I have tried and I can't. It isn't happiness. It's more like the absence of something you'd stopped noticing you were carrying, and then one morning your shoulders come down about an inch, and you sit there with a cup of coffee, and you cry a little for no reason you could name. I never told a single human being that, Not one. Remember that too. I called my sister that first week. Loretta Hazard, 69, up in Tallahassee, widowed since 2016. I'm in, I told her. All moved. Clay, I'm so glad. And she meant it. You've earned that, after everything. And then, about 4 minutes into that call, her voice did something. Trey's been asking about your place. Has he? Oh, he's very into real estate now, investments and all that. Did I tell you? He and Britt have gotten quite ambitious. And she laughed, and the laugh came out thin. I expect he'll want to come see it. He's welcome, I said. Just call first. We talked another 10 minutes. And afterward I sat on that porch and watched it get dark over the marsh and told myself that the little cold spot in my chest was nothing. It was not nothing. Trey called 2 weeks later. I was on the dock replacing those 4 boards. Trey Hazard, 34, my sister's only child, mortgage loan officer up in Tallahassee. Uncle Clay. Finally caught you. He's got that voice. That warm, forward-leaning phone voice you develop in a job where the phone is the job. Mom says you're all settled. Getting there. So listen, I pulled your place up on the satellite. That's a hell of a piece of water you've got. Do you know what the short-term rental market looks like on the Forgotten Coast right now? And my hand went still on that board. Rental market. Vacation rental. Airbnb, VRBO, all of it. A place like yours, waterfront, dock, private, you're looking at 4, maybe $4,500 a month in season. More if we put a little money into it. I've been running the numbers, Uncle Clay, and the return on this is not normal. I said, Trey, I bought this to live in. Right, and hear me out, because I've thought about this. We partner. You and me. I handle everything: listings, bookings, cleaning crew, guest communication, all of it. You don't lift a finger. You just take your share. And then he said it. And when it's not booked, you stay. The back room would work fine for you. I want to stop right here. The back room of my own house that I paid $338,000 cash for 11 days after I moved into it. And he said it warmly. That's the part I need you to understand. He wasn't sneering. In his head, he was offering me something, which means that somewhere between the satellite photo and that phone call, in my nephew's mind, ownership had already transferred, and he was being generous about my accommodations. If you have ever had somebody help you in a way that quietly relocated you in your own life, you know exactly how disorienting that is. You can't push back without sounding ungrateful. That's not an accident. That's the whole design of it. I'm saying no, Trey. His tone dropped about 10 degrees. That's short-sighted. You're retired. You're out there by yourself. What happens if something happens? Nothing's happening. At least think about it. There's nothing to think about. We'll talk soon, he said, and hung up before I could answer that. I stood on my dock holding a hammer. The pelican was on the piling. He turned his head and looked at me and looked back at the water, which is the most a pelican has ever done for anybody. 3 days later, Loretta. Clay. Trey's upset. He says you shot down his business proposal without even hearing it. Loretta. He wanted to rent my house out and put me in the back bedroom when there's a booking. What part of that is a proposal? He's trying to help you. He's trying to build a portfolio. He can do that with property he buys. A pause. You've gotten hard since you moved out there. You sound different. I sound like a man who's protecting the only thing he's ever bought for himself. After we hung up, I got out a legal pad. Old habit. In 31 years of pushing airplanes, if something happened on your frequency, you wrote it down while it was fresh. Time, call sign, exact phraseology. Not because you expected trouble, because memory is a liar, and a strip is not. So I wrote the date. Trey's words as close to verbatim as I could get. Loretta's call. I didn't think I'd need it. I did it because that's what I am. 2 weeks went by. Quiet. Coffee, boats, the bird working on the dock, and I started to believe he'd let it go. Then on a Tuesday in October, a gray sedan came up my shell drive without calling. Trey and Britt. Uncle Clay, he waved out the window like we'd run into each other at a gas station. We were down this way, thought we'd stop in. Britt got out and stood there in the crushed shell in shoes that had never been in crushed shell before, looking my property over the way an adjuster looks at a car. It's smaller than the pictures made it look, she said. What pictures? Oh, from the listing. When you bought it. She smiled. We've been studying it. Trey came up my stairs without being asked. Can we sit down a minute? We want to run something by you. And I let them in, and I want to tell you exactly why, because it's not a good reason. I let them in because if I hadn't, Loretta would have heard about it by dinner, and I'd have been the difficult one, and I have spent my whole life not being the difficult one. 15 minutes, I said. I've got to get to town. They sat at my table like it was a conference room. Trey put his phone down flat and turned it around, and there was a spreadsheet on it. Okay, so I've done real work on this since we talked. Gross rental revenue, in season and shoulder, 52,000. Net after cleaning, platform fees, linens, and management, right around 30. And here's what I think is more than fair, he said. 60-40. I'm doing all the labor, so 60 to me. You clear $12,000 a year for doing absolutely nothing. $12,000 a year, on my own house, which I own, outright. And he presented that number like a gift. I don't want $12,000, I said. I want to live here. And that's when Britt leaned in, and her voice went gentle in that way that isn't gentle at all. Clay, can I be direct with you? Go ahead. You're 66. You're out here alone, 40 minutes from a hospital, on a road that floods. What's your 5-year plan? And then she said the thing. Especially given Ruth Ann. God forbid, but these things run in households, don't they? What happens if you start to slip and there's nobody out here to notice? Now, I want you to sit in that for a second the way I had to. That woman used my wife's disease as a lever, at my own table, 14 months after I buried her. And she did at times kindly. That's the part. Her face was full of concern. I think, and I have thought about this a great deal, I think she genuinely believed she was being brave and caring by saying the hard thing out loud. Here's what I did. I got up. I refilled my coffee cup, which did not need refilling. I stood at that counter with my back to that table for about 4 seconds. And I want to tell you what went through my head, because it wasn't rage. It was this. Ruth Ann would have taken that woman apart in one sentence. And I don't know the sentence. I have never known the sentence. That was always her job. 31 years of talking pilots through emergencies, with a completely level voice, and I have never once in my life known what to say to somebody sitting at my own table being cruel to me politely. I sat back down and I said, my answer hasn't changed. And Trey's face closed up. You're being selfish. Mom said you'd be like this about it. Mom said you'd be like this about it. I put that on the legal pad that night, word for word. They left. Britt said something at the door about how I wasn't ready to see reason yet. I called Loretta before their car was off the road. Did you tell your son I'd be difficult? Clay, I said you were attached to it. He worries about you being out there by yourself. I'm not by myself. I'm alone. Those are different. Are they? Ruth Ann's been gone 3 years and you have gone out there and pulled the door shut behind you and now you're fighting with the only people you have left. And it stung. Because there was something in it. Not the thing she thought. Something else. But something. 3 weeks after that, I was in Apalachicola picking up hardware, and I saw a flyer taped inside the window of a coffee place on Market Street. Private Gulf Coast Getaway. Sleeps 4. Dock, sunrise over the water, and the photograph was my dock. My dock, my pilings, the bend in my creek. I went in and asked the girl behind the counter about it, and she said somebody'd come by and given her $20 to leave it up for a month. There was a web address on the bottom. I stood in that shop and typed it into my phone. Oyster Creek Hideaway. Professional site. Somebody had paid for it. 14 photographs. My porch, my dock, the view down the creek at sunrise. And 4 interior shots. My main room, my kitchen, the bedroom, with the bed made in a way I do not make a bed. $265 a night. 3-night minimum. And a booking calendar. 3 reservations already on it. 1 in 11 days. 2 more over Thanksgiving. I want to tell you what I felt looking at that, standing in a coffee shop in November holding a bag of galvanized screws. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was the specific sick feeling of finding out something has been running in public, under your name, without you, and strangers have been looking at photographs of the inside of your bedroom and picking dates. And one thought went through everything else, like a wire. When was he inside my house with a camera? I drove home doing 45 the whole way because I did not trust myself over that. Checked every window, every door, nothing forced. Which meant he'd taken them in October, sitting at my table, in the 15 minutes I'd given him, or through the glass on some visit I didn't know about. I called Charmaine Bevel and asked her for a property attorney. Winnie Talbert's office is in Panama City. I drove over the next morning with printed screenshots because I have never in my life trusted a screen to still say the same thing tomorrow. She read everything twice. Mr. Broussard, this is fraud. Not a family dispute. Fraud. He is accepting money from the public for the use of real property he neither owns nor has any authority over. What are my options? 2 tracks, and you can run both. Civil, we get an injunction. We go after any money he's collected. We go after damages. Criminal, we take it to the sheriff's office and the state attorney, and depending on what he's actually collected, that's a felony in this state. How fast can you move? Cease and desist by tomorrow afternoon, certified. Injunction filing inside a week. Do all of it. And then I said the thing I'd been chewing on the whole drive over. And I want cameras. $1,140. 4 of them, the shell drive, the stairs, the dock, and the back side of the camp. Cellular, motion-triggered, cloud storage. Man out of Carabel had them running by dark. The cease and desist went out certified to Trey's address in Tallahassee. 24 hours to take the listing down and refund every booking, or we go both civil and criminal. He called me at 7:40 that night. You had a Times lawyer send me a letter. I did. Over a misunderstanding. You listed my house. You took money for it. I was moving on the plan we discussed. We never discussed anything. I told you no 4 separate times. And then he said the sentence that told me everything about where his head was. Uncle Clay, I'm Time's family. We shouldn't be doing this through attorneys. And I said, take it down. Refund those people. If it's up tomorrow, I go to the sheriff. You wouldn't do that to me. And I said, watch. He hung up. I checked the site at 10. Still live. All 3 bookings still on the calendar. I called Winnie Talbert's after-hours line and left a message with 3 words on it. He's not complying. Now if you're still with me, hit subscribe before we go on, because everything after this point is the part I actually needed to tell somebody. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I read them. It's a quiet house out here, and I read every one. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed at 9:34 p.m. with a motion alert. I sat in my chair and watched it live on a 4-inch screen. Trey came up my stairs, tried the front door, went around the screen porch and tried that, went down and tried the door on the storage room under the house. All locked. And then he came back up onto my porch and he stood there. I want to describe this properly, because it's the thing out of all of it that I still see. He stood at my dark window for 2 minutes and 11 seconds, hands in his pockets, not doing anything, just standing there looking in at a house with nobody visible in it. I was 9 feet away on the other side of that glass, in the dark, in my own chair, watching my sister's son on a telephone. And I did not move, and I did not turn on a light. And here's what went through my head. He was 15 the summer I taught him to run a boat. Ruthann and I had him for a long weekend, and it would have been 2006. Loretta's husband was sick that year. And I took that kid out on the bay for 3 days and taught him to read water, taught him to back a trailer, taught him what a channel marker actually means. And when he left, he hugged me, which he had never done, and never did again. I thought about that weekend maybe twice in 19 years. And I found out later I'll get to how that Trey has thought about it approximately every year of his life, that he told Britt about it when they were dating, that it is, in his own telling, the closest he has ever felt to anybody in our family. 1 weekend. I gave that boy 1 weekend in 19 years, and it was the biggest thing that ever happened between him and any of us. That's not a defense of what he did. Nothing defends what he did. But you asked me why he was so sure I'd say yes, and there it is, he wasn't dealing with a person. He was dealing with a man he'd met properly for 3 days in 2006, who had never asked our family for one single thing, and who had never told any of us no. I was a blank to him, and people put whatever they need into a blank. The investigator came out on a Friday, Naomi Castellanos, Franklin County. Sharp, unhurried, took actual notes on actual paper. I walked her through all of it. The proposal, the refusals, the unannounced visit, the website, the interior photographs, the certified letter, the footage from Wednesday night. She watched that footage twice. Mr. Broussard, I want to be straight with you. This is fraud, and I don't have any doubt about it. But I have to ask, because I ask everybody, is this something you want to pursue criminally? Because these get complicated when it's blood. And I said, there's a booking for Tuesday. Then here's what I want. If he shows up with those people, you do not open that door. You do not go outside. You call me and you record and you wait. Are we clear on that? Clear. Tuesday. Now I want to slow all of this down, because it's the longest 26 minutes of my life, and I have replayed every part of it. 6:04 in the evening, early November, so the light was already going orange across the marsh. Headlights on the Shell Drive. 2 sets. Trey's sedan first, then a white SUV with a rental sticker on the back glass. I called Castellanos. They're here. Don't open that door. 9 minutes. I stood in my own front room in the dark with my phone up and recording, and I watched them come up my stairs. A couple. Mid-30s, maybe. He had one of those hard-sided rolling suitcases, and she was carrying a grocery bag with a bottle of wine in it and a rotisserie chicken. They'd stopped at a store. That's the detail that gets me. Those people had stopped and bought groceries for a vacation, and she had a printed confirmation email in a clear plastic sleeve, the way careful people do, and she was holding it out in front of her a little because she'd already sensed something was off. Trey tried my door. Locked, because I'd locked it at 4 o'clock and sat down and waited. He knocked. Regular at first. Cheerful. Uncle Clay. It's Trey. I've got your guests here. Your time's guests. I stood there and did not make a sound. He knocked again, harder. Uncle Clay. Open the door. And then a third time, and this one wasn't knocking anymore. This was a flat hand on a door. These people paid good money for this. Open the door. And the woman said something. I couldn't hear all of it through the glass, but I got the end of it. Is this actually your property? And Trey turned around and started talking to them fast, with both hands going, doing the thing he does on the phone for a living. I could see his mouth. I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. Now here's what was going on inside me during those minutes, and I want to be honest even though it doesn't flatter me. I wasn't afraid. I've talked 2 pilots down through engine failures and once through a fire, and my voice did not change either time, and it did not change that night either. What I felt was grief, because I was watching a 34-year-old man lie to 2 strangers on a dock I'd rebuilt with my own hands, and I understood right then, standing in the dark holding a phone, that whatever happened in the next 9 minutes was going to be the end of my family. Not most of it, all of it. I had a sister and a nephew. That was the whole list. Ruth Ann's people are all gone. And I stood there with my thumb on a recording and thought, very clearly, if I open this door and let these people stay 3 nights, I keep my sister. 3 nights. That's all it would have cost. That's the part nobody tells you about standing your ground. There's always a number, and it's always smaller than you'd think, and you have to look right at it and say no anyway. I did not open the door. At 6:13, Blue and White came up the Shell Drive. Castellanos didn't hurry. She got out, put her hat on, and walked over to the 4 of them at the bottom of my stairs, and I watched the whole thing through my front window like a television with the sound off. She talked to the couple first. That's what I noticed. She talked to them for a good while before she said one word to my nephew. And I watched the woman with the chicken and the wine put her hand over her mouth. And then her husband turned and looked up at my window, and I was standing right there in the dark, and I don't know if he could see me. I lifted my hand. I don't know why I did that. I've thought about it 100 times. I just did. He nodded. Once. And then he picked up their bag, and they went to their vehicle and left. They'd paid Trey $1,855 for 6 nights. Castellanos and my nephew stood in that Shell Drive for 11 more minutes. At one point he pointed up at my house. She said something and he stopped pointing. She handed him papers. He read them under the dome light of his own car with the door open, and even from where I was I could see what happened to his face. Then he left. She came up my stairs afterward, and I opened the door for the first time in 2 hours. He's been advised he's under investigation, she said. He's ordered to cease all rental activity, refund everything, and have no contact with you outside of council. And Mr. Broussard, he violated a civil cease and desist in front of a sworn officer with 2 witnesses. That helps you considerably. Those people, I said. They're very upset. Not with you. After she left, I sat at my table in a completely quiet house. The tin roof was doing nothing because it wasn't raining. The refrigerator ran and stopped. I poured about 3 fingers of rye that had been in that cabinet since before Ruth Ann got sick, and I took it out to the porch, and I could not taste it at all. My phone rang at 8:40. Loretta. I almost didn't answer, But not answering wasn't going to help anything. You had the Times, police Times out there. For my son, he took $1,800 from strangers to sleep in my house, Loretta. You could have called me. You could have called Times me, Clay, and I would have what? And that's when my sister said the thing. She said, "You wouldn't let me help you nurse your own wife." I didn't say anything. She said, 7 years. I offered you 7 years, Clay. I offered every month for 7 years, and every single time you told me you had it handled. I drove down there in 2019 without telling you, and you met me on the porch and would not let me in the house because it was times not a good day, she said. And now you want to stand there and tell me what family is. I want you to understand that I had no answer, not one, because every word of that was true, and I had never once, in 7 years, thought about what it was like on her end. I'm done, she said. Don't call me. And she hung up. I sat on that porch until about 2 in the morning. Here's what happened over the winter, and I'll go through it fast. The injunction came through. Trey was ordered to take the listing down and refund everything. Civil damages came in at $14,600, most of which I will never see and never expected to. The state attorney's office took the criminal file. He was charged in January. He took a plea in March with hold of adjudication, 2 years probation, $21,500 in restitution and costs. He avoids a conviction on his record if he doesn't put a foot wrong for 2 years. He also lost his license to originate mortgages, which is the thing that actually cost him, and which I did not think about until it happened, and which I have not made my peace with. Britt filed in April. From what I understand, it was less about the legal trouble than about 18 months of him telling her he had a plan. I got exactly one text from her, and it said I'd ruined a man's life and I hope you're happy. I didn't answer it. I didn't delete it either. It's still on there. Now here's the part where I come off worst, and it's the reason I'm telling you any of this. I spent most of December and January chewing on what my sister said, and around the middle of February I finally understood it. For 7 years my sister offered to help me, and every single time I said I had it, and I thought I was sparing her. I genuinely did. I thought I was being strong and not being a burden and handling my own business. Here's what I was actually doing. I was teaching my family, one refusal at a time, over 7 years, that I do not need anything from anybody. And a man who needs nothing has no limits either, because limits are just needs with a fence around them. So by the time I bought that camp, nobody in my family had any idea what it was. To Loretta, it was her brother going off to be alone again, like always. To Trey, it was an underperforming asset owned by an uncle who had never once refused this family anything, because I had never once been asked for anything, because I had made myself into a man you don't ask. And to me, and this is the thing, that camp was the first room I had woken up in 7.5 years where nobody was dying. I never told a single one of them that. Not Loretta. Not Trey. Not anybody. I never said, this place is the only thing that's kept me above water since March. I never said what it cost. So they priced it wrong. And you cannot be furious with people for mispricing something you refuse to put a price on. That's the lesson. And it's not the one I expected to end up with. People will not respect a boundary you have never explained the cost of. They're not mind readers. They're not even paying that much attention. And if you have spent 30 years being the one who doesn't need anything, then when you finally do need something, there is no vocabulary in that family for it. You never built one. So here's what I'd ask you to actually do this week, and it's going to feel worse than it sounds. Pick one thing in your life that people around you treat as negotiable. Your Saturday mornings, the spare room, your savings, whatever it is, and tell one person what it actually costs you. Out loud, before you need them to respect it. Not I'd rather not it's complicated. Say the real sentence. This is the only quiet I get. This is what's holding me together right now. You will feel like you're asking for something. You're not. You're doing basic maintenance on the fence, and fences that nobody has ever seen you build do not stop anybody. And here's the question I'd like you sitting with tonight when it gets quiet. What are you protecting right now that nobody around you has any idea of the price of? Loretta came in late April. I got the camera alert on the shell drive, and I looked at my phone and there was her car. She came up those stairs slow. She looked older. We both did. Can I sit down? We sat on the screen porch and I made coffee and neither of us drank much of it. She told me about the plea, about Britt, about Trey moving into an apartment in Havana, north of Tallahassee, and working at a tire place, which she said like it was a death. And then she said, When did I raise somebody who thought he could just take a thing that wasn't his? And I said, I don't know. And then I did the thing I should have done 7 years ago. I told her about the 14 months. I told her about the stretch in the middle where Ruth Ann knew exactly what was happening to her and would come find me in the kitchen at 2 in the morning to apologize for it. I told her about the night in 2019 that she drove down and I wouldn't let her in the house, and what was actually going on inside that house that afternoon, which I am not going to tell you, and which I had never told anybody. I talked for about 40 minutes. My sister sat there with both hands around a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking, and she cried the entire time and did not once interrupt me. And at the end of it she said, "Why didn't you ever?" And she stopped. Because she already had it. Because I didn't want to be a burden, I said. And so I made myself into something you couldn't get near, and then I got angry at all of you for standing far away. We sat a while after that. And the pelican came in and dropped himself sideways onto the end, piling the way he does, and Loretta looked at him and said, "What's wrong with his wing?" And I said, "I don't know, something old." And she watched him a minute and said, "He seems all right." And I said, "He gets by." She left before dark. At the top of the stairs she stopped. "Can I come back?" "Not soon, but sometime." And I said, "Call first." "But yes." She almost smiled. That's the most Clay Broussard sentence I've ever heard. I don't talk to Trey. I don't know if I ever will. He wrote me a letter in June that I've read 4 times and haven't answered, and I'm not going to pretend to you that I know what the right thing is there. But I'll tell you what I keep thinking about. 31 years I spent keeping things a safe distance from each other. That was the whole job, and I was extremely good at it. And I retired, and I did the same thing to my own family without ever once deciding to. The separation kept everybody safe. It also meant that when somebody finally came at the one thing I had left, there was nobody standing anywhere near me. So before you go, I want to hear from you, and I mean it. Comment a 1 if you think I did the right thing letting it go criminal that he took money from strangers. That's not a family disagreement, and a man is allowed to defend the only thing he's got. Comment a 2 if you think I went too far, that I could have stopped it with the injunction alone, and let my sister's son keep his license, and that I chose the harder road because I was angry. And comment a 3 if you think the person most responsible for how all this went is me. 7 years of saying times. I've got it times until my family stopped believing I had anything worth asking about. Number 3 is the one I want to hear about, honestly, because that's the one I'm still up with at 4 in the morning listening to that tin roof. And tell me where you're watching from tonight, and what that clock says where you are. Somebody's got this playing in a quiet house with 1 lamp on. I know that house. I'd like to know you're out there. Most of all, tell me if you've lived a version of this. If somebody in your family has ever looked at the one thing you finally got for yourself and started doing arithmetic on it out loud, in front of you, like you weren't sitting right there. You're not being selfish. You're being told, kindly, that what's yours is negotiable. And it isn't. But you have to say so. And you have to say what it costs before somebody else decides what it's worth. If this one got to you tonight, subscribe before you go. That's the thing that actually keeps this going. There's a new one every week, and the next one's already written, and I think it'll sit on you the way this one still sits on me. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of it. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Apalachicola, Florida to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.